Welcome to Dark Facade, a channel dedicated to looking past the veneer of humanity and finding its true face. I will be your tour guide down this winding path of tales, ranging from the supernatural, science fiction, and twisted love. All the stories you're about to hear are assorted bits of literature that will range from the bizarre to the unexpected. So sit back, lower the lights, and allow yourself to be taken away from everyday reality to its shadowy reflection. If you enjoy our unusual content, please be sure to hit the like and subscribe button to receive more. Thank you. The Book of Dark Names by Katie Rogers, read by Katie Rogers. Chapter 8. The next morning, Sean received a call from the captain at the precinct about a tip they had received that might help them in locating Rashad. Everyone agreed it would be more productive for the group to split up and meet back at the house later to compare notes. Evelyn volunteered to go with Christopher to his meeting with Richard, while everyone else went with Sean. Not much was said between the four friends as they navigated their way through the LA traffic to a destination that would take them outside of the city limits. Daniel sat quietly, reflecting on the horrors they had all witnessed the day before. Rashad had managed to tap into their minds and pull out their greatest fears and intimate thoughts with no effort at all. His psychic ability was like something you would see in a comic book. There was an undeniable power behind it that seemed otherworldly, and it frightened him. He looked over and saw his wife staring at him with slight concern in her eyes. Anna wasn't a mind reader, but when it came to her husband, she didn't have to be. "You're worried," she stated with certainty. "Yes, I am," he admitted. "It's okay, you know. I think we all are," she assured him. "We should be," he told her. "In all of our years, none of us have ever come in contact with such power." "Power, Danny?" Laura chimed in from the front seat. "There's no other word for it. You weren't there, Laura. You didn't feel it or experience it. He took complete control of everyone. He not only held us prisoner in our own minds with our own fears, he trapped us in some sort of mind loop. We all saw the horrors each of us were experiencing at his hand. Then he murdered Kaplan and his partner within minutes. Yeah, he is dangerous, and I bet you these handful of murders he's helped commit is just the tip of the iceberg," Sean said from the driver's seat. "All the more reason for us to catch him," Laura declared. "But can we?" Daniel asked. The car fell silent. "Don't get me wrong, I want to. I want to really bad. I just don't know if we will be enough," he confessed. "I know you are enough," Anna told him. He stared at her with skepticism written all over his face. "You're the one that put a stop to his attack. You threw him off balance and out of our minds. You beat him, Daniel. Why do you think he got so angry?" "It was just luck, Anna," he shrugged dismissively. "You beat him," she declared. "He was able to sucker punch us all because we didn't know what to expect, but not again. This time we know to be on our guard." "I hope you're right," he said while smoothing a stray bang from her eyes. "Well, if this tip pans out, we'll get our answer," Sean said as they turned onto a desolate road. The street had the look and feel of abandonment to it. The many low-hanging branches from the trees that lined the sides only added to the feeling of isolation. Though no one in the car expressed any concern, they mutually felt the shift in tone the minute their vehicle had turned on to the forgotten concrete path. As they rounded a bend, Anna noticed the arc of a mausoleum peeking above a small hill. They soon passed a large black iron gate, which was the entryway to an old cemetery. Since her death and resurrection, as the paper had called it, Anna was able to see into many realms. The world of the dead was one she was quite familiar with. Graveyards were a fertile ground of entry points into otherworldly places, if it proved to be haunted. The presence of ghosts in any house or location was a dead giveaway to the presence of a portal. The GPS announcing they had reached their destination pulled her back into the present. She had been so engrossed in her thoughts that she had failed to notice they were parked outside of an old Gothic house within the grounds of the cemetery. Sean double-checked the address to make certain he had it right before stepping out of the car. "You think this might have been a bad lead?" Daniel asked as he surveyed their surroundings. "Possibly," Sean sighed. "Maybe we should have a look around first," Laura suggested. Anna, who had strayed to the edge of the gravel drive, cautioned them not to be so hasty. "We're in the right place," she said as she ventured further into the burial ground. The spirit of a young girl had appeared to Anna from behind an old tree. She was dressed in clothes from the 1920s and looked to be between the ages of 10 and 12. She had long blonde curls and big blue eyes that sparkled with wonder. She put a small finger to her lips before beckoning the lovely psychic to come with her. Anna glanced back at her friends, then silently motioned for them to follow. The group moved quickly through various statues of weeping angels and elaborate mausoleums until they came to an abrupt stop in front of the crypt. It resembled the big house that sat on the edge of the graveyard. The name Howard was etched on the dark glass of the doors of the entryway. The child then pointed a ghostly finger to the door. "You want us to go in there?" Anna asked, a little bothered by the idea. The girl nodded. "What is it? What do you see?" Daniel whispered from behind. "There's a child. She wants us to go inside this crypt," she told him, without taking her attention off their guide. "Why?" Laura asked, with the same level of discomfort Anna had experienced. "I don't know, but she's pointing at Sean now. I think she wants you to go in first," she said, looking directly at him. Without hesitation, he headed to the front of the line and quickly proceeded down the steps. Before breaking the glass, he tried the door to see if it would open. Just as he expected, it wouldn't budge. "Run your fingers along the top of the frame. There should be a key there," Anna told him. He felt over the ledge until his pinky hit something loose. A long black key fell down onto the concrete at his feet. To the surprise of everyone, he managed to open the crypt door with very little effort at all. Before going in, he switched on his cell phone's flashlight and encouraged everyone else to do the same. He lightly kicked the door open with his foot and went inside. The darkness of a mausoleum was like any other kind. There was a stillness to it that acted like a black hole which swallowed any and all light. The flashlights on their phones were a pitiful match against the unrelenting shadow. Even the sun that streamed through the small windows seemed to get lost in the dim. As they ventured towards the center, they noticed 3 coffins placed ceremoniously together. The one to the left was child-sized, while the other 2 were adult. The name on the child's box was Millicent, while the bigger ones read Mildred and Jacob. Realization hit Sean after seeing the names on the caskets. "There's no doubt about it. We're definitely in the right place," he declared, while feeling around the edges of the coffins. "What are you talking about?" Daniel asked, confused. "That house and this crypt belonged to one of the most famous science fiction writers in the early 20th century, he said. "Who and what does that have to do with any of this?" Laura shrugged. "His name was Jacob Garrison Howard, and Rashad was a huge fan of his work. The gods of his savage religions were based on the beings Howard wrote about. It was rumored that Howard in fact headed a secret cult that practiced the rituals and rites of these long-lost faiths. It was also rumored that his devotion to said beings came to a swift end when one of them killed his daughter Millicent." "Millicent is the child that led us here," Anna murmured. "Yes, she was," Akaike said, while continuing his search elsewhere in the crypt. "So how did you come to know all this? And what are you looking for?" Daniel quizzed irritably. "I did a little more research on Rashad before I fell asleep last night. I came across their connection and also remembered something about Howard's crypt containing a secret passage of some sort. It led down to a room where his cult met, Akaike explained. You think that this might be the hideout for Rashad, Laura stated. Yes, he nodded while continuing his hunt. Everyone joined in the quest and soon forgot that they were sifting through a death house. Anna felt a chill on the back of her arm that had become all too familiar for her. She was being touched by a spirit. Millicent's ghost had entered the tomb and had placed her small hand on Anna's elbow to gain her attention. She stepped back to a stone ledge near the back of the crypt. The psychic followed her, then noticed a concave circle in the center that looked like a place you set a vase of flowers. Millicent put her hand in the center as if to push it down. Anna followed suit, and just like that, the metal coffin slid forward to reveal its hidden secret. The team rushed over to examine the new discovery. Well, it appears your research paid off, Daniel declared while shining his phone's flashlight down into the dark stairwell. Do you think we should try to apprehend him on our own, or should Sean call for backup? Laura asked. We stand a better chance against this creep than anyone else. I say we go down now, Daniel replied. Me too, Anna agreed. Wait a second. Everyone be quiet, Sean ordered as he tilted his head towards the passage. What is it? Laura whispered after a few minutes. Music. Strange music. Can you hear it? He asked. Everyone stared blankly at him. Come on, we have to find out where it's coming from, he said as he descended down the stairs. Daniel was the last to enter. He wanted the two women wedged securely between him and Sean. The passageway smelled of damp earth and water. The darkness was an unrelenting force that haunted their steps with oppression. Anna was grateful that Evelyn had chosen to go with Christopher today. She would not have been able to walk through these tunnels. She hated the dark. They all saw how much when Rashad played his game with them. She sensed Laura wasn't doing too well herself. The pretty blonde was claustrophobic, so this was truly a grim exercise for her. Just when the darkness was proving to be too much for all of them, a string of lights flickered on. They turned around to see Daniel standing near an old switch. No sense in us stumbling around in the dark when we're the only ones here, he said. Rashad isn't here? Laura asked. No, no one is. It's just us. I scanned the place. We're alone, he told them. The group surveyed their surroundings as their eyes adjusted to the sudden brightness. The light bulbs were encased in metal cage fixtures that lined the walls. Apparently, someone had put electricity down here some time ago. There were rusted torch holders next to the lights, indicating that they had come later. The walls, which should have been lined with neighboring coffins, were concreted up and covered with drawings of what looked like ancient beings. They looked sort of Egyptian in appearance, but older, like a civilization that predated the early culture. What gained the most attention was the text written all over the walls surrounding them. It was the same writing that had been carved on the cursed objects. We've seen this before, Laura said. Sean, who normally would have been studying the whole scene more intently, had ventured on ahead of them. Regardless of Daniel's assurance, he could still hear the music, but it was growing louder with every step he took. He followed the sound of drum beats and chanting until he reached a large circular doorway that emptied out into a big room. He could hear the music clearly now, and from what he could tell, there was an assembly of people just inside. The fact that the others didn't hear anything and Daniel did not pick up on any other thought patterns told him this event was one from the past. He boldly stepped through the doorway to see what was happening. There were people gathered in small groups on either side of the room, leaving an aisle between them. They were dressed in long red robes with hoods drawn up over their heads. At the front of the room was a sort of stage with an altar. On the back walls there was the drawings of the beings they had seen in the hallway as they came in. Directly behind the altar, however, There was a big statue of what appeared to be a man dressed as some ancient pharaoh. He had his hands outstretched over the altar, his palms facing down as if he were waiting to bless or receive something. Upon closer inspection, Akaike noticed the altar itself had the image of an Egyptian woman carved into it. She was lying horizontal with her hands reaching upward and her mouth open. A series of cobra sculptures lined the front of the stage that acted as torches. The snakes' eyes and mouths were alight with flames. To the side of the altar stood Rashad, fully dressed in the likeness of the image over it. He wore a maniacal grin on his face as he stood quietly. Sean saw something shiny at his side and moved in for a closer look. He only had to take a few more steps before he realized it was a long knife in his hand. The terrible clarity of the ceremony's purpose hit Akaike like a ton of bricks. A sacrifice was about to be made in the name of the idol on the stage. His growing dread multiplied when he saw Rashad's expression change from anticipation to twisted glee. The sacrificial lamb had entered the room. The detective spun around to see who or what it was. It was difficult, at first, for him to make out what he was looking at. There were two figures dressed in the same crimson robes as all the others assembled. There was someone walking between them, but he couldn't quite see them. From what he could tell, it was a woman dressed in a thin white gown that was almost transparent. Her chestnut locks were styled like that of the goddess on the altar. The classic golden cobra crown rested high on her brow. As their small procession became more visible, the detective was instantly struck with recognition. A famous face from the missing persons list came strolling solemnly down the aisle. Kimberly Perkins had been an up-and-coming young actress on the silver screen. She was believed to be the first victim in the barrage of cursed objects being sent out. Unlike the others, however, she had not been found murdered. She had not been found at all. The only remaining clue to her disappearance was a painting that had recently been delivered to her house. The portrait was the very cursed work entitled Man of Pain. The backstory to this particular artifact was it had been painted by a scorned lover. He had mixed his blood into the palette and upon completion left written instructions for it to be given to his ex. He was found a few days later in his studio hanging by his final work. The legend stated that any woman who obtained ownership of the piece tended to disappear and were found later dead from suicide. Whether the actress was going to die by her own hand or not was of little consequence now. Her death was certain. Kimberly continued her treacherous promenade until she reached the altar, where she would meet her end. The two robed characters that had been her escort fell back into the crowd, leaving her to Rashad. He held his hand out in dark invitation, which she accepted without question. He then led her up to the altar, where she lied back to await her fate. Sean's heart skipped a beat as the rising tension became almost too much. Rashad took the blade that he had been holding at his side and raised it up over his head. The crowd's chanting became more feverish as they eagerly anticipated the death that was sure to come. As Rashad brought the knife down, Sean lunged towards him, forgetting that these were images of what had been. A firm hand gripping his shoulder broke his concentration to the past. Daniel's worried face hovered above him as the terrible visions disappeared into the dim. He blinked in the sudden stillness, trying to adjust back into the present. It was always difficult to regain his mental footing, especially when the past presented itself so disturbingly. Laura and Anna were now standing over him alongside Daniel, equally concerned. "What happened, Sean? What did you see?" Daniel asked uneasily. Rashad was here. There was a small gathering of people. They were dressed in red robes and chanting in a strange language, he told them while struggling to get to his feet. Daniel helped him up and held on to him until he was certain his friend was steady enough to stand on his own. Akaike turned around to look at the altar behind him. There were distinct dark red stains all over the stone surface. His eyes trailed up to the male idol. Its outstretched hands were coated in blood. He had not been able to finish the vision, so he did not know exactly what had happened. From the looks of it all, Kimberly Perkins was definitely dead. It was a sacrificial ceremony, wasn't it? Anna said as she watched him staring at the altar with intense alarm. He nodded. Well, we can only assume it was in the name of whatever being this guy is, Laura said as she attempted to snap a photo of the statue for record. The victim was Kimberly Perkins, Sean announced. The group went quiet. The missing actress? Daniel asked. Yes, she was the first one to receive one of the cursed objects, he replied. I don't get any of this. What is the tie between the cursed objects and this? What do they need them for? Laura asked in frustration. My guess is for the dark energy they contain, Anna said. Why do you say that? Daniel inquired. Because it all has one thing in common. Darkness, she said, while shining her phone's light directly into the idol's face. Sean broke the momentary silent reflection on Anna's statement by announcing he would need to call for forensics and other members of law enforcement. Daniel watched his wife study the statue with dread. She was afraid, and it was more than just knowing what had been done here. She was frightened of the idol itself. Anna stared at the image as if she had seen it before. She jumped when he touched her shoulder. You know that face, don't you? He asked. She nodded. Was he the one that chased you in the darkness? Yes, she answered abruptly. The hand of trepidation ran its icy fingers down her spine. She trembled in its grip as Rashad's terrible vision came flooding back into her mind. He had plucked her greatest fear directly from her childhood. It was the very nightmare that had awakened her from the dead and changed her life forever. She had been wandering through a misty darkness in a world without shape or end. She could hear various sounds, such as footsteps, or voices raised in strange laughter and pain. Even though she was a mere child, she remained cautiously silent. Through the haze, she saw an approaching figure. She could make it out well enough to know it was male, not female. She called to the stranger, hoping he would turn out to be a familiar face. Poppy? The figure paused at the sound of her voice and for a moment simply watched her. She froze like a deer in headlights. Whoever he was not her father. The stranger then uttered something in a language she had never heard before that was as foreboding as her surroundings. Anna began to back away. This seemed to anger the being, or at least agitate him. His already deep voice dropped to a darker pitch, and his eyes lit up like red fire, piercing the ghostly dim with their fury. She turned and ran. He followed. She could hear his thunderous footsteps behind, echoing as loud as the hooves of the fourth horseman. For that was who he was. She was certain of it. She was being chased by death. She felt his heavy hand on her neck like a sharp prick of a needle. That was when she woke up in the embalming room of the funeral parlor screaming. Daniel had promised never to enter her thoughts uninvited, but this time he did. Anna was trembling so that he had taken her in his arms, and the emotion was so strong it had drawn him in. Anna was rarely afraid. She had grown so accustomed to her gift that very little rattled her. Today, however, had become one of those uncommon occurrences. The warmth of Daniel's body and arms pulled her out of the consuming shadow of her memory and back to the present. She took comfort in the rhythm of his heartbeat before staring up into his chocolate-colored eyes. From the first time she ever gazed into them, she knew she had found her soulmate. At this moment, they were her anchor and way back. "You don't have to be afraid like that again, Anna. Not ever again," he assured her softly. "I am afraid, Danny. I am still that child running away from evil," she replied sadly. "No, you are not, and this time you won't face him alone," he promised. Anna leaned in and kissed her husband tenderly. He always knew just what to say to make her feel better. She allowed herself a moment more in his embrace. The terrible dread that the idol had inspired began to melt away until at last it dissipated into the gloom around them. Laura finished taking photos of the room for them to review later. Then they all began to walk up to the surface. Sean led the way, checking his cell the whole time for signal bars. As they ventured out of the tomb, they came face to face with Rashad. Oddly enough, he didn't seem surprised to see them. He did, however, turn and run quickly out of the graveyard towards the house. Akaike, who had been talking with the captain of the precinct, cut his conversation short and led the charge. As they neared the front yard, their assailant disappeared before their eyes. "Where the hell did he go?" Laura panted as they all looked around dumbfounded. "He's done this to us before," Daniel said. "Look, up there," Anna cried while pointing to a window on the second floor of the house. The team dashed up to the front door. It was left wide open, almost as if inviting them all inside. Sean looked back over his shoulder to his three companions. He was trained for uncertain situations like this, but they weren't. The policeman in him said to make them stay outside, but he knew that wasn't going to happen. Daniel looked his friend in the eye and confirmed it for him. "Lead the way. We'll follow," he told him. "Okay, but stay close," Akaike replied before pulling his revolver out. Slowly and with extreme caution, the detective entered the front door. After he scanned the room, he motioned for them to proceed. Without any hesitation, they filtered in and headed for the staircase. The house itself looked as if not much had changed since the day it had been built. The walls were still lined in one of those floral patterned papers from the time. The peg and groove wooden floors were covered in various decorative rugs that gave the old place an eerie feel. The spooky ambiance wasn't helped by the furnishings being covered in ghostly white sheets. When they reached the foot of the staircase, Akaike stopped and turned around. "Listen, I think it's best I go up and look alone," he said frankly. "No way, we're going with you," Daniel replied stubbornly. "Dan, we know Rashad is up there, and it could get dangerous," he argued. "Precisely, that's why you're not going up there by yourself," Laura snapped. "I'm armed, none of you are," he stated calmly. "Neither is Rashad, but he doesn't need a gun to be dangerous, does he?" Anna reminded him. "We're stronger together," Daniel told him. With a deep sigh, Sean resigned himself to the idea. He knew that his friends were right. He turned back to the staircase and began the ascent. They didn't get past the first few steps before Anna stopped them in their tracks. "Wait," she gasped. Everyone paused and looked back at her. "There, in the parlor," she murmured while pointing at a shape in the shadows. "Impressive, Dr. Sims, most impressive. Your eyes are as sharp as your mind," Rashad praised from his dim harbor. The group stood in the hallway, slightly confounded. With the sudden appearance of their shadowy friend, the light seemed to retreat from the whole place. The shadows grew bold and spilled out of their gloomy corners and dank places. They could not explain it, but there was a connection between Rashad and the darkness. It was as natural to him as sunlight to others, and he drew his strength from it. When the house took on the appearance of nighttime, Rashad finally spoke. "Come now, are you still shocked at how quickly I move from place to place? You've witnessed my ability with your own eyes. Is it really so hard to fathom how I got here?" Daniel was the first to regain his senses and entered the room. The others followed. "Yes, do come in. We need to talk," Rashad declared menacingly. "Okay, Why don't we begin with you telling us what you did with Kimberly Perkins' body? Sean said. Kimberly? I don't recall a Kimberly. Only an Anarchus, he replied. Anarchus? Laura echoed. Yes, in the New Tongue, it roughly translates to food of the gods, he told them. Food of the gods? You're not suggesting cannibalism? Why not? Most world religions today hint at it in one form or another. Even your beloved Christianity, counselor. This is my body, this is my blood. Surely you remember your dear friend Dr. Harris did an entire lecture circuit on this very subject. You ate her? Anna gasped in disgust. Well, not all of her, and not all by myself, he smiled ghoulishly. What is this all about, Rashad? What do you and your insane cult hope to accomplish? Daniel demanded. To give mankind the gods they deserve, Rashad hissed. Gods? What sort would those be? Anna asked nervously. Those that celebrate the true nature of our beast. Lust, wrath, greed, all those basic instincts that former gods denied us, he replied with a twisted gleam in his eye. So you're just another satanic cult, Daniel said dismissively in an attempt to get a rise. You're no fool, counselor, and neither am I. We both know it's not that simple. You don't understand the full extent of what is coming, but you will. You all will, he assured them prophetically. What? What is coming? Sean asked. The darkness is, and you can't stop it. Rashad smiled maniacally before disappearing into the dim that he seemed to be made of.